There we go. Okay. Tasting and evaluation. What do I mean by this? So first we have to make the distinction between drinking and tasting. When we say tasting, we mean specifically for analysis and evaluation. It is a methodical process. It's scientific. We are evaluating the wine. Taste is subjective, so flavors will appear different to different people. They will be perceived differently, but there are objective or fairly objective attributes. That is, these are unchanging. Like you can't argue that the residual sugar is a certain amount. So that's what I mean by objective. It's measurable. It's not based on your perception of things. Drinking for enjoyment, drink what you want, how you want. If you want to add ice cubes to a glass of rosé in the summer, be my guest. But when you're tasting, you need the right equipment, you need the right mindset, you need the right skills. The tools I will just mention, if you use anything but a two-step waiter's corkscrew, also called a pull taps, I have literally no respect for you as a hospitality professional, because this is the only viable tool. Every single other model of corkscrew is inadequate. The rabbit things break. The electric ones, they definitely break. Yes, they're convenient, but this is pretty much the most valuable tool in your arsenal, because without the corkscrew, you're kind of screwed. Pun intended. All right, a decanter. In addition to exposing the wine to oxygen, a decanter is meant to literally decant the wine. You are taking the wine off of the sediment. So the purpose of decanting is to leave the sediment at the bottom of the bottle and have pristine wine with no sediment in it. Since a decanter is open and there's a lot of surface area, it also exposes the wine to oxygen and thus opens it up and makes it evolve more quickly than if it would just stay in the bottle. Also, pretty much every red wine, with the exception of Pinot Noir, you can decant. I personally just don't decant Pinot Noir, particularly red Burgundy, because the flavors are so delicate and nuanced. That's not something that you want to accelerate. You want to keep it as it is. But particularly Bordeaux, most Cabernet Sauvignons, very tannic wines, anything high in tannins will benefit greatly from decanting. And then finally, stemware, choosing the right glass for analyzing the wine, the right shape, as well as something with a stem. I do not believe in using stemless wine glasses. I don't like them at all. Sensory input, so olfaction, your nose, your smell, that's your sense of smell. So you can discern aromatic compounds. A lot of times faults in the wine will be discernible through smell. And then you have retronasal olfaction, which is a process where if you take a sip of wine and swallow, particles from the wine will come up the back of your throat into your sinuses, into your nose, and you'll smell that way as well, as opposed to just inhaling straight out of the glass. Taste, the palate, the tongue, the mouth is called the palate. This is where you will discern sweetness, bitterness, the acidity, how sour it is, and astringency, how drying it is. So you'll feel the tannins. None of these things can be perceived from the smell. You could argue that a wine could smell sweet because of the notes, like a sweet dessert wine will generally have like honey notes to it, but it's really not until you get it onto your tongue that you can perceive the sweetness. The vast majority of taste preferences will depend on the person's concentration of taste buds on their tongue. People who have a very high concentration of taste buds, these are called so-called super tasters, they will be very sensitive to bitter flavors, and they will prefer lighter wines, not so bold, not so assertive, not so bitter wines. Someone who has a lower concentration, this is where you generally find people who like very assertive flavors, very bold flavors, bigger, fuller bodied wines like Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. And also generally people who like spicy food, people who like a lot of garlic. This is generally because they lack a sensitive instrument. They don't have a lot of taste buds, so they need the flavor cranked up to 11 in order to perceive anything. If someone's going deaf, they need to turn up the volume on the TV to hear it. It's the same thing with taste buds. They lack the instrument to taste nuanced and delicate flavors. And so that is going to be your job as a hospitality employee, as a wine professional. It's going to be dealing with people who don't know their palate, don't have any wine knowledge, and the responsibility is on you to be the communicator to help guide them. So let's talk about some attributes in the wine, what causes them, and what you can look for. Body is just how light or full the wine is. The technical term for this is viscosity, how viscous it is, how thick or not thick it is. The higher the viscosity, the thicker the wine, the fuller bodied it is. That generally means the higher the alcohol level or higher residual sugar. Also, additives can do this, make it fuller bodied and more viscous. It's an additive called Mega Purple that boosts the body, gives it more color, gives it more sugar. Generally, again, this is very reductive. This is very, very reductive. I'm speaking in gross generalities here, but wines or grapes grown in a warmer climate will lead to a wine that is fuller bodied. And if you need a visual representation or something that's not associated with alcohol, think about the difference between skim milk and half in a glass. If you swirl around skim milk, it's not going to run down the sides. It's not going to stay there. Whereas if you have heavy cream or half and half, it's going to coat the inside of the glass and run very, very slowly because it's fuller bodied, it's thicker, it's more viscous. Same thing goes for wine. Those tiers, those legs that you see, the slower they run, the more viscous the wine, the fuller body the wine is going to be. Acidity. Acidity is measured by pH. There's the pH scale. The lower the number, the more acidic it is. The higher the number, the more alkaline or basic it is. So 10 to 1, 10 being very basic, 1 being very acidic. Almost all wine you're ever going to drink is going to fall between 3 and 4, with the sweet spot being in like the 3.5, 3.3, 3.7, in that general range of acidity. Any lower than that, any more acidic, and it's just going to be too much. Any higher than that, there's not going to be enough acidity, and it will taste, the word people use is flabby on the palate. It will taste like there's nothing really there because the acidity is a crucial component in conveying the flavor across your tongue and across your palate. You will feel the acidity on the sides of your mouth. It will cause you to salivate involuntarily, and you'll feel it here. But that can be very refreshing. Like lemonade on a hot day is refreshing because that acidity brings out your salivation. Also, as an aperitif before a meal, generally whatever is served, like people drink sparkling wine or white wine, a light crisp-bodied white wine before dinner because it gets you salivating, thus making you hungry or getting your appetite ready. You salivate in anticipation of eating something. Acidity can also balance sweetness, so acidity is a crucial component in sweet wines. Sweet wines that aren't balanced with acidity taste cloying and syrupy and not very good. The acidity is crucial. And also, acidity is very helpful if you're eating fatty foods. So like a very, very fatty meat, having an acidic wine will help cut through that and also create those flavors that we talked about in the last class. The food pairings, you will get acidity and fat and get a new flavor that you can only get from the food and wine pairing that will not exist when you consume the wine and the food on its own. And then the other thing to keep in mind is you'll need high acid wines if you want to pair high acid foods. If there's anything with citrus, if there's anything with vinegar, if there's anything with tomato, you'll need higher acid wines. Otherwise, the food will completely eclipse the flavor of the wine and you won't taste any wine. And generally speaking, again, reductive, generally speaking, cooler climates produce higher acidity in the wine. So Champagne, far north, cooler climate, very high in acid, versus Bordeaux, which is further south, warmer climate, fuller bodied wines, more alcohol, more sugar. Sweetness or dryness. Dryness is the opposite side of the scale. It's sweet and dry. You can measure this. It is measured in residual sugar. That's generally a number that's given in grams per liter. Dessert wines can be up to 50 grams per liter. Most wine on the market today is in the dry category, and that means it's either 1 gram of sugar or less. So it is practically no sugar. That's a 1 or a 0 on my little sweetness scale here. This is taking into account unfermented juice that's been added. They can also add beet sugar. Can also add cane sugar. There are a number of ways you can bolster the sweetness of a wine. A lot of dessert wines are fermented only partially, so yeast will be allowed to convert sugar into alcohol, and then they'll be flash frozen, or sulfur dioxide will be added to kill the yeast, to stop or halt the fermentation part of the way through. So you're left with a wine that's still very high in sugar. And generally, wines that are made that way will be in the 7% alcohol by volume. So considerably lower than you would find with most dry wines, which are going to be in the 12 to 14%, depending on the region. Oak. This is going to be really important when it comes to white wines. A lot of red wines see oak also, but for red wines, we use the tannin scale, which is, I feel like, a little bit more crucial. For white wines, we use the oak scale. And this is just a measure of how much oak the wine has been exposed to. Generally, wine will be put in a neutral or used oak barrel. That means it's not going to contribute a lot of flavor. It's basically just going to impart a little bit of structure. So it'll be just a little minor dimension to add depth. When new oak barrels are used, and these are new charred oak, so oak has sap. When you make a barrel from it, the inside of the barrel is charred or toasted, and the sap is caramelized, and there are sugars there. And then when you put wine or spirits into this barrel, they will contribute vanilla, baking spice, coconut, and depending on the type of oak, because different types of oak impart different flavors, a signature of American oak is a flavor note of dill. It's not entirely unpleasant. Some people really like it, some people don't. But oak and the percentage of new oak is a scale that we can see. If someone really doesn't like the bitterness that oak gives to wine because they're very sensitive to bitterness, suggest something that is an unoaked wine, so a 0 or a 1 on the scale. 1 I generally use for neutral oak. 0 I will use for a wine that has not seen any oak that's been fermented in either concrete, clay, amphora, stainless steel, anything but a barrel. Tannins for reds. Now, this is a little confusing because tannins are the bitter compounds found in the skins and the seeds of the grapes, but also oak has tannins. So when we're referring to the oak scale, that's also tannin. It's just reds are the only one where the tannins are from the grapes as well. And you can see it in the color. The color of a wine is generally from the tannins. They add a dimension of structure, astringency. They'll either be low tannin reds like Pinot Noir, which are going to be very silky, very smooth, very easy to drink, very low tannin because the grapes are very thin skinned. High tannin reds like Cabernet Sauvignon, Tannat is really high tannin. Syrah can be very high tannin. These are astringent. These will leave your tongue or your gums or your mouth feeling like sandpaper, feeling rough. But high tannin wines are something that contribute to age-worthiness, meaning higher tannins mean the wine will last longer and can be aged for longer. And then finally, price. Price is going to be affected by many, many different things. Where the grapes are grown, for starters. So real estate the cost of vineyards in much of France is very expensive. Real estate in South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, much cheaper. So you're seeing much better value for the wines. How the grapes are harvested, whether it is mechanical, you have these machines that will do it where possible, or was it harvested manually? Are you paying human beings to go out into the vineyard and pick grapes? That's a lot more cost intensive, a lot more labor intensive, and therefore a lot more expensive. And so for vineyards, particularly old world European vineyards that are like on very steep slopes, you can't use any harvest equipment. It can only be harvested manually. So generally that's going to be an expensive wine. Before you even get to the winemaking, you've only just harvested the grapes. Winemaking equipment is expensive, fermentation vats, crushers, presses, all the stuff that's used. Oak barrels. Oak barrels are expensive. Thousands of dollars for a single barrel. Bottling, what kind of glass are you using? Is it a special custom bottle? Marketing, are you paying to advertise this? So like big brands, a lot of times the price is you're paying for the marketing and not so much the juice that's in the bottle. If it's a brand you've heard of, if it's a brand you see everywhere, if it's a brand you see ads for, a lot of cost is going into that marketing and not necessarily into the quality of the wine. That's why I personally like smaller boutique independent producers that are lesser known, but you get a lot more bang for your buck. You get a lot more value. Taxes and tariffs. And then finally, just supply and demand. If there's scarcity and there's a high demand for whatever the wine is, that's going to drive the price up as well. Age worthiness. So less than 1% of wines that are produced are meant to be aged or cellared or laid down for any significant amount of time. Most wine, in fact, is consumed within 24 to 48 hours of its purchase. That's the majority of wine consumed in the world, whether it's on the premise where you're buying it, so like at a restaurant or a liquor store or wine shop. That bottle is getting consumed within 2 days. Any number of these attributes that you see here that are high enough will make a wine age-worthy. If it's all of them, that's generally an indication that is very age-worthy. But if you have high alcohol, so in the case of like port, Madeira, Marsala, sherry, stuff that's been fortified in the almost 20% alcohol range, that you can lay down. That's preserved. It's very high in sugar. A lot of dessert wines, they can age for many, many years. If it's very high in acidity or tannin, decades. So very tannic wines you can lay down for decades, particularly like Barolo, which is made from the Nebbiolo grape from northern Italy. We'll do a deep dive on Italy one day. That can be aged for, I've had Barolo that is 40 years old and still able to age more. So yeah, Bordeaux, Barolo, stuff that's high in tannin. And price will be a factor here, but that's not to say that just because a wine is expensive means it's age worthy. It's just that wines that fetch a certain price range are generally of a certain quality, meaning they can be aged. They will last. Just to review from last time, these are the 4 biggest wine regions, the most important ones that we're going to cover because of the wines, of the grapes that they grow there and the wines that they produce. Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon. Those 4 grapes we will now cover. We will look at these attributes. So this is a Sancerre. This is a Loire Valley, France, white wine made from Sauvignon Blanc. It is a 2 out of 5 for body, so it's a lighter body. It's a 4 out of 5 for acidity, so it's higher in acidity. It's a 2 out of 5 for sweetness, so it's on the dry side with some fruit to it. I would even say this is a 1 out of 5 probably on this scale. No oak, so it's a 0. And a price point is, I believe, in the $20 to $30 range, so $2 signs. This pairs very well with shellfish, with Thai food, goat cheese, and pork. Those are what I would use to pair with this particular wine. But you can see these are the attributes of a Sauvignon Blanc, if you took any Sancerre, they would fall somewhere along this line. It's going to be rare to find a Sancerre that's full bodied. It's going to be rare to find a Sancerre or a Sauvignon Blanc that's lower in acidity. And it's going to be rare to find a Sancerre or a dry Sauvignon Blanc that is anything more than a 1 or 2 out of 5 for sweetness. Hardly any Sancerre sees any oak aging, so you're not going to see that. And as we said last time, Sancerre is very moderately priced. So there's not going to be $3, $4, $5 signs is just unheard of. The most you're going to pay, average Sancerre is going to be $20 to $50 a bottle. Chardonnay, 3 out of 5 for body. This particular example is a white Burgundy from Domaine Butazet-Prieur. It's 100% Chardonnay. Chardonnay is fuller bodied, so this is a 3 out of 5. It's not huge, but it's medium plus body. 3 out of 5 for acidity. It's rare that you find a very, very acidic Chardonnay, but again, acidity is a crucial component that you need. So 3 out of 5 is pretty spot on. 1 out of 5 for sweetness. 1 out of 5 for oak. This is a very neutral oak. However, this is the French style, so it's very low oak. A lot of California Chardonnay is going to be much higher, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, sometimes even heavily oaked wines. If you've seen a bottle, it's a yellow label with a bear on it and flames. I think it's called Toasted Head. They use a ton of new oak, so that would be like a 5 out of 5 for oak. I like my oak a little more restrained, so just a touch, 1, 2, maybe 3 out of 5 at most. Anything more than that, I find a little bit too overwhelming. And this particular wine is a $2 sign in the $30 range. Again, pair this with shellfish, cured meats, richer fish like tuna and salmon, rich like fattier fish, as opposed to leaner fish like tilapia or cod. And then mild and soft cheeses, all great pairings for Chardonnay. Pinot Noir. So this is an estate bottled Pinot Noir from the Russian River Valley, one of my favorites. The producer is called Porter Creek. 3 out of 5 for body. 3 out of 5 for acidity. 1 out of 5 for sweetness. It's on the definitely dry end. 3 out of 5 for tannin. It's actually got more tannin than you would expect from your typical Pinot Noir, but what that does is give it some really nice structure and complexity and makes it really, really great with food, particularly beef, lamb, or game. So I love that. You can also pair Pinot Noir with poultry. This is $3 signs. This is on the higher end in the $40 to $50 range, but a spectacular bottle. I love Pinot Noir because it's just so versatile. And honestly, if there's a wine that's any more tannic than 3 out of 5, it upsets my stomach. It gives me like acid reflux. So not my favorite. And then finally, let's look at the attributes of a Cabernet Sauvignon. This one in particular is one of my preferred ones. This is from Paso Robles, the Adelaida district. A producer called Halter Ranch. This is a 4 out of 5 for body. So Cabernet Sauvignon, it's obviously going to be fuller than the Pinot Noir. 3 out of 5 for acidity. It's not very acidic. It's in the medium acidity range. 2 out of 5 for sweetness, just because this presents with a lot of really round fruit to it. So I stand by that. That's definitely 2 out of 5 for sweetness. 3 out of 5 for tannin. It's got some tannin, but it's not so grippy that you get that sandpaper feeling. It's just a little bit of structure there to make it stand up very well to beef, lamb, and game. And this particular bottle is in the $3 signs again, $40 to $50. Pay at least $20 for particularly like reds, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet, and you can't really go wrong. There are a lot of amazing producers doing $20 to $30 bottles of reds. A white you can get away with in like the teens, in the 10 to 20 range. But I favor white Burgundy. That's always going to be like 30-ish. I just drink it less frequently. That's pretty much it. We covered a lot very, very quickly. It's 6:30. I want to keep these short to about a half hour. Let me see. Are there any questions? And you can feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. Otherwise, we're good.
But I actually did have a question. When I came to the, you know how you mentioned the white wine was measured in oats instead of tannin, right?
Yes, I talk about the oak, not the tannin. Yes.
So when it comes to like measuring the tannin, like in white wine, would you like include or or would you just measure in like different scales?
So what that'll be is generally, if it's a reputable winery, there will be a technical sheet for the wine, which will indicate how much time the wine spent in the oak barrel and what the percentage is of new oak barrel that was used. Generally, it's like 10, 20, 30% new barrels.
Okay,
That scale, so like 10%, that'll probably be a 1 out of 5 on the oak scale.
gotcha.
20% will be 2, 30% will be 3. When you're beyond 30%, you're doing like 4 or 5 out of 5. That's a lot of oak.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah,
but yeah,
I didn't know
it's
that. I was just like kind of seeing how would you measure, like would you include those? You still consider the oats like tannin though, right?
uh, what is being imparted to the wine. There are some tannins from the oak, yes, yes. So it's a little confusing, but and that's not to say that red wine doesn't see oak also, right? But
Okay,
with red wine, the oak is less of an issue for people. With white
gotcha,
wine, there are people who like if a white wine has seen any oak at all, they're like, oh no, I don't want it. I can't do it.
gotcha.
Versus
Okay,
red wine, people's preferences are not going to be the same. Like generally, people who like red don't care either way if it's been an oak or not because they're okay with the tannins.
yeah. There's like a lot of factors that play in. It's just like a preference.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Any
Okay,
other questions?
not for me. No, I don't know if
Okay.
anyone else.
No, I think we're good. I'm going to stop recording there.